For our second section of Speed Biomechanics in Module 1 here, Lesson 4, we're going to talk about organizing exercise progressions based off the 3 phases of the sprint here, from the start to acceleration to max velocity. So looking here at the start, we're looking at step count, steps 0 through 3. These steps are crucial to the trajectory and the timing of your sprint. Like we talked about before, we don't exceed inside our facility beyond 30 to 40 yards. And if you work with team sport athletes, this is what we recommend, obviously with the exclusion of track athletes. So looking at steps 0 to 3, here's what we know. You can achieve up to 25% of max velocity by step 1. Now, this findings have been from Les Spellman, and here we found this to be the same by running split times. So knowing that my sprint is 30 yards, using my step count, I can see what was the exact split time, what was the velocity for that given distance, and how does that equate in relation to my 30-yard sprint. Now, moving on, the subsequent step, number 2, is almost 40% of max velocity. And how would you know to run an accurate split time or what your trajectory step count should be? Here is a list. Step 1 during our 3-step count should be around 1 yard. Now, if this is a novice, intermediate, advanced, or an untrained athlete, this could vary. But this is an optimal step count for an athlete is 1 yard during the initial start of the sprint. Step 2 should be between 2 and 2.5. Step 3 should be between 3.5 and 4 yards. This is going to vary based off length, levers, and anthropometrics of the individual. But this is now you can set up a split time through 5 yards or even 4 yards if you know that's the step count you are looking for, and then running that split time and comparing it to the totality of the distance that you're ultimately going to train or work up to. This is how you know what velocity was achieved in those steps. Now, what is the optimal positioning, or what are we looking for technically during that start? Well, we're looking for projection, timing, and rise. We're trying to minimize air time. We're trying to spend more time on the ground, and we're trying to get a lot of backside push as we drive out through the sprint. So backside mechanics are important. Yes, I need to make sure I swing from the hip. Yes, I'm looking at 90 degrees of hip flexion, but I'm trying to counterbalance my torso in relation to the ground at about 45 degrees or even less with excessive arm drive. Now, here are the 3 things based upon section 1 of Speed Biomechanics that we look for in the technicality of the start. When we look at posture, how can we improve posture? We can use the wall, we can use a fixed object like a prowler, and now this is not moving, this is not what we're talking about. We are talking about what is happening lower body wise. So we are looking at the drive, we are looking at their position of their torso all the way down to their heel. We are looking at how well they drive, how well can they exchange. This is just a great exercise to reinforce technique in regards to creating reference point for the athlete. Now our levers, right, using our levers in acceleration. During acceleration, there's going to be slight, or I should say there's going to be almost incomplete triple extension. Why is this though? This is because during acceleration, I don't want to be at my extreme end ranges, because this is a muscle at length is where I could be more susceptible to injury. So by having a place to go, now I know that I'm going to be able to generate more force behind my body. Yes, I'm still looking for good angles as I come out, but again, remember, sprinting is partly rotational in how the body moves. So we're looking again to use our levers here. So examples of these can be our falling sprints, adhering to our principle before, soft to hard in ground contact and minimizing collision. Then we will go to a 90-90 sprint to take advantage of our levers because they're fighting against gravity down at the ground. So this is a great drill to build strength once we have, again, built in the ability to handle force as they fall to the ground. Lastly is what we call an ipsilateral push, or just a single leg drive. This is just, again, for horizontal trajectory. I'm looking for how far off of one leg can an athlete create force, right? Because I'm trying to go from 2 feet to 1 foot extremely, extremely forcefully. Moving on, horizontal trajectory. This is the main objective of our start. We're looking for prowler loads and lifts. These can be from different positions. This could be from a 90-90, a little bit higher, but this is essentially how I go from a more compressed position to an extended position, generating strength at length during those earlier phases. Then I can do exchanges. Then I can begin to do banded work with my prowler load and lift and my prowler exchanges. And you can see some of these in the exercises that we will be uploading. Now, banded two-steps. This is another great drill. A banded two-step allows an individual to fight through resistance to develop, again, strength at length here. So these are the key things we're looking for during the start of the sprint. Now, moving on to acceleration. What is our step count? We're looking at steps 3 through 10. Obviously, as distance increases, velocity increases, and ground contact time decreases. So 60% of max velocity at step 6, 75% of max velocity at steps 8 through 10, right? And we know during this range, we are experiencing a lot of force, almost 6 to 7 times our body weight during steps 8 through 10, because we are moving at a faster velocity. The distance here between 10 and 20 yards, again, this is all dependent on anthropometrics, the gender of the individual, and all of the different factors that play with those. Here are some of the key KPIs that we're looking for in regards to the technicality of this sprint. We're looking for horizontal trajectory still. We are looking for, again, rapid arm swing, low heel recovery during these initial steps, a little bit of a slight shin angle, slight triple extension, but most importantly, they talk a lot about this at Altus, in terms of rhythm and rise. We're looking for projection, we're looking for rhythm, and we're looking how well an individual transitions from the start to earlier phases of acceleration as they begin to reach max velocity. So here are the things that we're looking for in technicality of that sprint. We are looking for posture. This is where we begin to introduce some of our principles that we talked about. So now we're looking at patterning, we're looking at some posture, and we're drifting away from some of our levers because our joint angle changes as we progress through that distance. So now here, we're going to introduce some of our march series, some of our arm swing series, because we're prepping the body to handle these higher velocities. Moving on to our pattern, this is our exchange series. These are a great drill to understand or have an athlete understand how to rapidly exchange each lower limb in conjunction with their arms at faster forces. Now, our levers. These are now our power steps. So a power step is an initial start that exceeds your 0 to 3 steps. A power step can be up to 5 to 6 steps. So now I can cover, again, I can get all the way up to step 6 here with my power step where I'm still pushing back into the ground and I'm still a little bit more forward leaned because I'm looking at my horizontal trajectory. Lastly, like I just alluded to, horizontal trajectory is still a part of acceleration. So this is where resisted sprints play a big role. Transitioning here are KPIs in terms of technical capacity that we're looking for in max velocity. These are steps 11 through 25 plus, depending on the distance. So if you're running a 30, 40 yard sprint, you're probably going to be in the 25 plus range. Again, based off anthropometrics and gender and genetics, this could be less. So if I have an athlete who's a basketball player, they're a little bit taller. We've had athletes run 30 yards in about 20 to 22 steps. Now, this is where 95 to 100% of effort is achieved. Now, you're not going to reach 100% effort over time. That's why we take our averages. But we need to know that we're hanging out in this range to get the adaptation. Now, remember, there is an inverse relationship between airtime, ground contact time as velocity increases. And this is because we're trying to spend less time on the ground, achieve less ground contact time. Now, this is the most infrequent exposure that most athletes will experience, because I'm not going to experience max velocity in earlier phases of the start and acceleration. So how do I build this in? This is going to be a lot of sub-max tempo runs and striders, and now we're going to build in intensity on our situational days that we talked about before to help with the technicality of what we're building on our linear day. So here's the 4 KPIs that we're looking for from a technical standpoint: posture, pattern, and vertical trajectory. For posture, we're looking for eyes forward, a taller torso, but also a lot of pelvic variability. The pelvis will go into states of anterior and posterior pelvic tilt as our hip extends and then steps underneath our frame and then cycles through. So we need a lot of pelvic variability during max velocity, and of course you need it in earlier phases as well, but especially at max velocity. Now for here, pattern, we're looking for low heel to hip swings to striders. Here's a simple progression that we use that allows to reinforce technique as swinging from the hip, extending the leg out in front of me where I can see my heel, but as I land during my touchdown phase, my foot is under my center of mass. So now we know this is under my center of mass here, and we're gonna progress, and we're gonna show some exercises of how we start slow, exchanging, moving up in distance, and then creating separation, adhering to our inverse relationship between air time and ground contact time. For vertical trajectory, this is where we can use ankle dribbles, calf dribbles, and high knee dribbles to extend and get the athlete to understand how to lift at the hip, how to extend the leg in front of them, and how to cycle the leg through as they reach greater distances. So adhering to the principles that we talked about in our first section, now you can see how they manifest themselves in the start, acceleration, and max velocity. And I'm going to break down a start, an acceleration, and then max velocity in the next video.